Hello, absurdians, those who listen to Into the Absurd. I have a very special episode for you today. I know it's been a month since I posted a podcast. I got really sick, so sick. I had a fever for like 6 days in a row, and for some reason, I didn't go to urgent care until the sixth day. At which point they told me I had pneumonia. So then I had to get on antibiotics. And long story short, I was basically all I could really do was go to work, get off work, eat, and sleep. That was basically my schedule. So I wasn't able to post on the pod, but I had one in store for us. Me and a couple buddies went to Post Falls Brewing and we just talked about philosophy for like 4 hours, and I recorded an hour and a half of the conversation. It was actually me, Dylan James, Trenton Jones, who have both been on the podcast, as well as the person who introduced me to these two fine fellows, Mason Petersheim, which is actually my girlfriend's brother. So in this conversation, we kind of talk about communism. We talk about Marxism. We mainly focus kind of on Nietzsche, existentialism, and sort of the whole agnosticism, Christianity, religious debate, um, and diving into a few other topics as well. So yeah, this is kind of the first four-person podcast. I hope you enjoy it. I don't want to take up any more time because it's been a month and it's time to dive into the absurd. If you want to support the podcast, just go to into-the-absurd.com and purchase a copy of my novel, On Death and God. And that's it, everybody. Let's dive right into it.
Five seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
You.
Okay, so if I might interject, there's actually two different forms of justification for propositions or beliefs towards propositions. One is based in evidence and facts, right? But there's another one that's actually prudentially justified. So, for instance, when I say I take Junior to the baseball game, right, and he fucking sucks. He's gonna get up to the bat, he's gonna like miss it every time. Now, if I'm being epistemically, I'm not justified in believing that Junior's gonna hit the ball. If anything, I should be like, son, you suck. You're gonna get up there and just bear with dignity, right?
Thank you, Dad.
But I don't do that, right? Because I'm prudentially justified. Insofar as I tell Junior, like, I love you, God loves you, and I just pray and you can hit that ball, right?
Yeah, but then you're biased. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, though. When I do that, maybe Junior gets confidence. Maybe there's possibilities for hitting the ball.
Yeah.
So there's some prudential fact that justifies that belief. You see this all the time in debates where atheists and apologists are talking past each other. And some atheists at pains to tell apologists go, well, we need to believe in God so we ground morals in society, or we need to believe in God because I can't have bed in the morning. They say, see, like, epistemically you're unjustified, but prudentially that you are. So they're in the epistemic camp.
So that's kind of part of the reason why I went from atheist to agnostic, is because what I realize is that a lot of times what atheists will argue against religious people is the facts. They'll argue the facts about the Bible. And the thing is, the Bible, it's not about the facts. It's never been about the facts. People will take it for the facts, but the real thing is the meaning behind it. It's just like if I read Harry Potter and I know that it's fiction, and I get some kind of sense of friendship and good and evil and all these things, that'll affect the way that I act in life, and that'll affect my beliefs in life about what is good, what's evil, what does it mean to get in a friendship with someone, and things like that.
What's inherited archetype about how to handle this situation?
Yeah, the symbolism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but I could say the same thing. It's like the whole purpose of writing is to convey a certain meaning, and you're trying to get people to feel a certain way by writing. I feel, just in a general statement.
Now, do apologists, do they take the Old Testament to be like more of the Word of God? Because isn't like kind of like the whole thing that like Moses is writing for God, versus like the New Testament is like they will kind of acknowledge as like John and Mark wrote these things, and they might not be like ordained by God, which has been making me think recently about like, you know, does that kind of create a tension between like, because there are a lot of Christians who distance themselves from like the Old Testament, but isn't that more of like the Word of God than like the New Testament? So shouldn't that carry more weight than what John, Mark, or Luke had to say? Yeah,
I think I have something to add to that. So it's interesting. I remember an interview with Richard Dawkins where he explained that he believes that the truth claims of religion, such as Christianity, are fundamental to what it means to be Christian. I completely oppose this idea. I think what's actually fundamental to, say, a Christian worldview is accepting the moral claims or the claims about how you ought to be.
Yeah.
And so I see a bunch of pseudo-atheists that say, I don't believe in God. And they go home like to family reunions and they pray with everyone else. Or they go to church on
but you
Christmas.
believe in belonging to your community that
but see,
you
that's
ascribe
the thing.
to. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is like I'm doing sort of a sociological critique of religion. So on the factual level, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it performs certain sociological function. Which hence we have priests who perform the function of society, feed the church, but they might confess, hey, I don't really believe in God. Like, I'm just wearing the suit, you know. And that I find it absolutely fascinating. And so for me, the heart of any religion or system of values isn't the set of beliefs, but really what those beliefs entail or what they make you do. It's sort of the end result. Like, there's nothing, I'll say, the other day I went to a funeral, and I swear to God, I sat in the back room, and then and someone rise to sing a hymn. I refused. I sat down, and I remember someone stood there and looked at me and said, "Get the fuck up," you know. And I'm like, no, like I'm not getting up. Like, and something as simple as that, like, totally changes your paradigm, right? Because like I don't just like say, "Oh, I don't believe in God, but I'm going to get up out of like social respect."
But
it's like
your action of not standing went completely against those people's beliefs. Essentially, not by the fact that you were like, oh, I'm just going to do this because I want to go against what they believe.
Right.
No, I'm just doing this because this isn't what I believe, and these people just so happen to the fact can't separate the two.
Yes. Yeah. And so the way I distinguish it is the difference between an intellectual atheist and a cultural atheist. Okay. So there's an intellectual atheist like Richard Dawkins that go around and pray, I don't believe in God, but they believe in helping the poor. They believe in compassion.
And that's the same virtues.
Exactly. Right. And I'm not convinced he came to that point by Buddhism. I know for a fact, culturally speaking, it's because of Christianity, right?
Yeah. Because, it's just Christianity under a different guise.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm not opposed to those value systems necessarily, but we know for a fact that when the atheist who has absolutely no moral basis for compassion comes and says, "Oh, God's immoral," I think, you idiot! Like you can't say that without a God, you moron. So culturally speaking, like I would say, we need to create a new foundation for our system of values. If that leads to compassion, that's fine, but we need to perform the dirty work of doing that. We can't
that leads into Nietzsche's total reaffirmation of values. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like with me personally, like
by bugs.
Feeling compassion is like I with religion, it's like I'm not gonna tell a Christian that Jesus or God doesn't exist because that's
kind of
not right. That's against my morals. So I'm gonna ascribe to the fact that I'm not gonna bring that up. It's not.
You're not a maniac. You're not come to Junior and say, "Hey, guess what? God doesn't exist at his funeral."
It's like I respect what you believe as a person, just like I am able to believe in what I believe. Exactly. So everyone's able to make their own decisions in life, and some people just don't make the right decisions for themselves. That's not up for me to decide.
Yeah, and that's what, that's what I've learned like the past few years is that I don't believe that Jesus was like the Son of God,
and
or that he's God.
Metaphysically,
but the story of Jesus, dying for everyone's sins, that is representative of the individual being willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of humanity.
Well, it's like just like reading a good fictional tale.
Yeah.
And it's like being able, like me personally reading Percy Jackson, I was able to relate so much to the main character because that's how the story was written.
Sure. Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to my whole point of like every single story, fiction or nonfiction, has meaning behind it that is supposed to be portrayed.
Exactly.
It just really makes me wonder, like, really, it's like, especially with there being so many different versions of scripture, it's like what is true and what isn't.
Sure.
It's like what is supposed to be conveyed and what isn't supposed to be conveyed.
Well, and that's my problem with atheists, is because they'll totally disregard everything in the Bible. No, it's just fiction. It doesn't matter, right? But
it's full of meaning,
if
dude.
you took some of the lessons from it, it would actually benefit your life at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Like for I've been really wanting to read like different religious texts, like the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, et cetera, because I really want to, for one, kind of just dive further into my own spiritual journey.
Envelop,
But and another reason is because I want to understand all these different people and these different cultures and how they came to these conclusions about how they live their lives and how they view reality.
I feel like to do that, though, truly, you would really have to delve into every single aspect and factor of that culture and of that society and of that sub-society that's somehow related to this sub-society, So it's like there's so many levels to it that it's like, I feel like that's almost impossible.
But that's actually...
Unless you lived in, had that lived experience.
Well, it's interesting conventionalist arguments. You can think of people as existing for hundreds of thousands of years, and people coming out and bitching, like, she did this, he did that. Imagine being Moses, hearing all these people and say, I'm going to create some sort of commandments. You get people get along. Now, imagine that those same rules sort of pop up around the world, not as a matter of accident, right? Because they help order society. But I suppose what I have a problem with is this conception that the Western mode or interpretation of those structures or value systems is the correct one. So, for instance,
that's just the Western mindset.
Right, exactly. For example, when Jordan Peterson gets up there and he has me at like that point, right? He says like the Jungian archetypes represent the sort of transpersonal set of information that we've gathered through hundreds of thousands of years telling us how to behave that have worked. Got me there. But then he says, but then Jesus is the prime example of that. I go, why not Buddha? Why not Achilles, motherfucker? Why not? And so things like this pull out to me in moments like, I remember I was raised on Tolkien. And what got me about Tolkien was sort of this cognitive dissonance where we have this sort of affirmation of the pagan morality of like doom and acceptance, right? Like there's something very pagan about Tolkien that really stuck with me and was like, this is good. And then suddenly it's like this sprinkle of Catholicism that just totally doesn't belong. I'm like, wait, hang on a second. Like Sauron's a bad guy? Like, okay, I kind of follow you there because he's kind of a psychopath, but but Sauron's a real guy. I mean, in fact, Tolkien himself admitted, and this is interesting, in an interview he said that Sauron is an atheist because he thought that God's lack of intervention in Middle Earth was proof that God didn't exist.
But then again, wow, it's like, wouldn't Sauron himself consider himself a god?
Well, that's what he did. Yeah. So, but nominally speaking,
he can. Conjected him.
Yeah, exactly.
He's kind of like he's Satan in the Lord of the Rings.
Well, and in some sense, it's kind of the Uberman. So imagine like your Middle Earth and everything.
And then, do you guys want another beer?
I'm all good.
Sure, I'll have one more. Why not?
Yeah, we have a water station.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'll
go grab me some water.
Could I get the Dark Horse American? Actually, what did you have?
Oh, that was the...
it wasn't a stout.
This one right here, the second one.
Yeah, I'll have the unchecked aggression.
Do that one?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I might go for the darker beer this time.
Don't you're
Dark Horse
dark
American
beer
Stout
guy.
beer, can you please?
Perfect.
Cool, and then my tab's under Thorn James.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Both going on it? Or
Absolutely.
separate?
Would you mind?
Sure.
Cool, yeah. Let's do that. Thank you.
Single bingo.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind.
I bought us first rounds, you bought us a round, now it's my turn to take it back. Yeah. Reciprocity. But yeah, no, it's interesting.
Wait, hold on. I thought you were an immoralist.
No, that's how I roll. But Sauron's interesting because he's sort of an Ubermensch in the sense that he says, look, the lack of divine intervention in this world is proof that God, practically speaking, is non-existent. You can argue to me all day that God's here, you're praying to him, but why bring you to my torture chamber beneath Barad door and get information out of you? I don't hear God like knocking on the door to interrupt us. and quite literally speaking, he is one of the most powerful Maya or spirits present in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
So he says, I'm going to act as though I'm God in this situation.
I don't know why, but that makes me think that like Christians can be put into like kind of a precarious situation where it's like, when the Holocaust is happening, it's like, why is God not stopping this? And if the answer is, well, because they're Jewish, then that is like a whole thing where it's just like,
oh, that's
yikes,
crazy.
For like,
well, I mean,
if that is like,
generally speaking, the answer will be because they have free will.
Yeah.
Right.
But
the sheep are so moral. We have free
what
will.
is free will?
there's a free will, like the thing is like, because of my materialist, commitment for my philosophy, it does lead me to having to like accept a determinist view rather than like free will. And there's just like that part of you that doesn't want to accept that. But then what put my mind at ease was someone just said, just take it as it is the case that determinism is true, and then reflect.
Can you just like short consensus of determinism?
Basically, like how we got here right now, if you were to reconstruct everything in the same exact order, starting like, butterflies fluttering the same way, everything in the exact same way, every single time we would end up at this table having this conversation.
There's the dark horse.
Wow.
And
Thank
then
you.
there's the unchecked.
You
Great.
wanted that one, Greg.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers.
And but someone said, let's take it to be the case that determinism, is, correct, or is the case, and then reflect back. Does anything about what you do or what you know or what you're gonna do change? And the answer is no.
Yeah, because it's all going to end up leading to the exact same thing, which your choice technically wasn't a choice; it was already predetermined.
Right. It's not necessarily that it's like predetermined, as in like there's a predetermined outcome, but that if those conditions were to present themselves every
That
single
thing
time,
would for sure happen every single time.
you would pick that every time.
But where does that stem from, though? It's like
Democritus is the first one, I would say. I mean, don't quote me on this because I'm pretty sure Democritus is a materialist and a determinist metaphysics.
yeah, but I mean, like, where do you get like the fact that is determined, though? I think that's also probably some philosophical.
Well,
question
that's
leads
like
into
the
something
belief
more
in cause and effect.
spiritual.
Yeah.
So like we believe that every action has a reaction, and that reaction is determined by the laws of physics. However, what Nietzsche argued is that cause and effect is a mythology. That if we were to go back in time, it's like the why game. You can go back in time, you keep asking cause and effect, but there was never an original cause. And if there's never an original cause, then how can there ever be any effects?
Right.
See, that's what I'm kind of like trying to grasp my head around now. Is like, how can there be such and such and such the butterfly effect of where we are now, and then what caused that? And then that's when you probably get into the same conversation of what we've just been having.
Well, here's an interesting analogy. So, writing off Greg here about Nietzsche, he gave this analogy. Imagine a lightning bolt flashes, right? And light happens, and then there's thunder, right? Now, imagine had this mythology. There's something in between the two that says the lightning could not like thunder, right? So this is the positing of the free will between the act of the lightning flash and the consequent, thundering, right, or flashing, or whatever.
So in this scenario, you're giving the free will the thought of that potentially happening?
Yeah. So like the lightning bolt had
So
the ability
in our
to act
minds,
otherwise. Yeah.
the lightning bolt happened, but it also had the potential to
Right. Well, not just
thunder.
not just potential, but to do it, but the potential to withhold it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nietzsche says this is absolutely absurd. Like, but you see, that's a very basic case. But then you say, well, you go on the more macro scale and you think of societies, like individual psyches, right? How they necessarily react to a situation, right? And this is what makes him a really profound thinker: is that regardless of his own personal tastes about human excellence, he was a master psychologist. Because look at individual psyches and say, I can kind of predict based off of your mind how you're going to react to this sort of situation to preserve yourself or whatever. And to be honest, it's kind of spot on. I mean, we especially when it gets at the archetypes and
That's the
geometry
thing about
morals.
psychology, though. I learned
master,
it's always
slave,
going to be
priest.
kinda. It's never going to be fully concrete.
Right. Well, because it's not as simple as banging two balls together. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Like there's like fucking 10 million different webs that come together.
Psychology
Create
runs in
a Mason in Trenton. And
Yes,
Dylan.
yes.
Great.
Psychology runs into the same issue that philosophy has, which is when you get down to it, consciousness is just impossible to answer.
It's just
and
your own.
understand.
It's your own easel that you've
Right
painted
now.
your whole life.
Yeah, right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you're saying about lightning and the possibility, that's the one thing that I guess for like determinists, one thing that's kind of wonky, like when you get to quantum physics and that level, because in quantum physics, one of the things that you have is the fact that when you have some particle that you're trying to observe, when you put light onto it, it's going to bounce to an area. But the problem is it's not going to bounce to the same area every single time.
But it's going to consistently have a reaction.
There's a possibility, where it's going to be, 51% over here. And
Yeah, and I think the argument is if we knew everything about quantum mechanics, if we knew everything about the universe, if we were God per se, then we would be able to calculate out billions of years into the future about how things would happen, right? How reality would transpire before us.
Right.
I think this is something that Dostoevsky talks about in Notes from the Underground, where even if us as humans understood, if we had all the facts, if we had all the knowledge that this would lead to this, if we knew the deterministic facts about reality, we would still act despite those deterministic facts out of spite. So, like, if we knew that we were going to die if we went over that hill and, if we crossed the Atlantic Ocean to the New World or whatever, we would still go.
Right.
Despite those facts.
It kind of reminds me of Sartre's book Nausea, where the person in questions whether or not he has free will, and to remind himself he does, he smashes his hand to a glass, right? And people go, holy hell, why'd you do that? He says, well, just to affirm, again, in my mind at least, I have free will. Not necessarily that they do.
But then you could say it's like, well, that's what someone who thinks free will exists would do.
Sure. Yeah,
And then that's just this cycle.
That kind of predetermines it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. No, that's actually really, really interesting. I mean, in this regard, this is something that I find really fascinating. So I have sort of a struggle in my mind between the scientific worldview and the phenomenological view that ultimately stems from Kant, right? So Kant, right, to kind of paraphrase, the phenomenological discussion, had this view that when you're open on the world, there's no such thing as a perspectiveless access to objects. So for instance, like I'm seeing brown, I'm seeing gold, I'm seeing amber, I'm seeing the horizon, which is kind of a mixture of pink and blue, etc. Now, what's interesting about Kant is he says, what I'm accessing right now in terms of color exists objectively in the actual world. It's a color spectrum. But I'm not open on literally every single color spectrum in existence. I have to be God to be that.
That's the thing, though, is like it brings up the fact, at least in my mind, that people are seeing everything extremely differently, and that not everyone is gonna see the same color the exact same way.
That's right.
So it's like the
it's
Vsauce
like there's so much diversity.
That's right.
You've seen the Vsauce video where he's like,
talks about the Greeks.
my color red might not be the same as your color red.
Exactly. So
I see,
it's like a small example of how things could be so similar yet so different.
Right. And Kant would say you're actually accessing reality at some point. Even in dreams, for instance, you're accessing a portion of reality. How you interpret, on the other hand, is totally, beyond, what's already presenting. So that's the phenomenological aspect, right? So I have a dream, right? But the fact that I'm having the experience can't be questioned. Because when Descartes says, it could be a dream, if there was nothing there to doubt in the first place, you couldn't doubt anything. In fact, there would be nothing to talk about. So the fact that there's an experience there that is of some sort of reality, it has to be a fact. Yep. How you choose to interpret that, though, depends. And so, think of materialist and deterministic perspectives on the universe. Insofar as it's accessible to us objectively, we can sort of have this march of science in a Hegelian sense, where we come to the absolute in the sense of that appearances are liberated, and we can access appearances as they are in themselves, insofar as we access them. And then through history and through knowledge, we can finally conglomerate all those together into sort of a final knowledge. Now, you can be a skeptic about that, like Nietzsche, and say, well, there's no such thing as a final march to history because everything's determined by the will of power. But that's a different story.
Trenton, you've been trying to say something.
Yeah, sorry.
My question was just, does Kant subscribe to colors being a property of the object itself, or as a phenomenon happening in the mind?
So I'm taking a stance on Kant interpretation. So there's certain people like Schopenhauer, for instance, that would say absolutely that the world as it is in itself, in reality, is not accessible to us. Everything is just a product of our brain.
Right. The world is my representation.
Exactly. But here's the thing, though. Here's the upshot. Kant, as a matter of fact, says my book is a refutation of skepticism. Now, if everything that is happening in your head and not accessing reality isn't skepticism, I don't know what is. So we have to reconcile the fact that Kant thought that his response to skepticism was successful. How the hell do you make sense of that? And it's like, well, if you read the Critique of Pure Reason very closely, what he's saying is that we have glasses through which we see reality and it has to be conditioned. But what we receive from reality, sensory experience-wise, is not thereby refuted. In fact, it's in reality already. It's just that it's not the whole thing. So the metaphysical projects of the dogmatic scholastics that said, oh, we can access the mind of God, we can have absolute knowledge of absolutely everything in propositional form, is absolutely refuted. Because there's no such thing as an access to reality itself that is perspectiveless. You'd have to be literal God to have all perspectives of all color spectrums and all facts, all times and places. It simply doesn't make any sense. In fact, to even think of anything outside of time and space doesn't even make sense, from a Kantian perspective. And so my take on Kant, I believe, is called the one world, two aspect theory, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. I don't have my notes here, but it's basically that there's two aspects to reality. There is reality as it can be accessed by me, and there's reality independent of the powers that allow me to access it. And that's sort of the thing in itself, as it were. Yep. But what I'm seeing isn't not reality. Whereas Schopenhauer would come in and say, no, it's not reality, it's a will or whatever. Kant would say, no, you're doing something that can't be done. You're trying to access the thing itself, which is beyond your cognitive power, so shut up. That kind of thing. And so that's why it's a successful response to skepticism. But the problem is...
Is it a response? So when you say a response to skepticism, is that including Hume? Because I know
yes.
Oh, he woke me from my dogmatic slumber.
That's right. Yeah. Well, what Hume said is essentially that how can I know anything a posteriori or via empirical experiences without those experiences in the first place, right? Because the next experience can refute it. Now this sort of casts doubt over whether or not I can access reality at all. Kant's argument is essentially that in order to access reality at all, you already have to have certain preconditions that allow you to access it. A good example, actually, is Bert Baumgartner visited me during my office hours in Philosophy Club. I was the only person there, and he showed up, and I was reading Hume. In fact, he passed the room and looked in and said, oh, you're reading Hume? Good, because he knew I was reading Kant, and he wanted to read Kant. But here's the thing, he came in, and I was kind of contemplating the debate between Hume and Kant, and I said, like Hume says, we can't know what future experiences are going to be like because future experiences can always be refuted, right? Yeah. But then I asked him, well, in order to have future experiences be refuted, things have to stand in temporal relation to one another. So for instance, like when I drop, like let's say I take my glass here of beer and I drop it, right? Like I would be very surprised if I just let it go and stood still in midair, right? That would be a Humean instance of being refuted by future experiences. Yeah. But in order to have that happen, I had to have had the cognitive capacity to not only had past experiences temporally ordered, but to withhold them in my imagination and then present them currently with my current experience. Because imagine if my mind had like a random reboot every 5 minutes, like a memento, like I just woke up and suddenly had no memories. The problem induction couldn't occur. So the whole Humean premise of the doubt presupposes the power of the mind to have this capacity to hold on to identity across times and places. If that didn't exist, then the problem of induction doesn't exist. And so it's sort of this gotcha move on Kant. It says, well, in order to have your problem, Hume, you had to have these principles accepted that are true across all times and places. It's sort of refuting the idea that there's no such thing as knowledge across all times and places, as it were.
I mean, and even if you don't forget your knowledge from the past, you're still going to change your behavior and your knowledge based on the stimuli that you're currently receiving.
Right, yeah.
I just want to know where my beer's at.
Where's your beer at?
That's what I'm at.
Well, take initiative.
I did, but now it's like
assert your will to power.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, assert your will to power.
Well, stop bitching because you're weak and go in there and ask for something.
Assert your will to
That's
power.
the practical way to go about things.
No, I said in all seriousness, jokingly though.
I don't know what philosophy I would fall under now, but it's like I'm very hopeful that my beer will come soon.
You're very faithful.
You have faith that it will come.
Yeah, faith that will come.
If you don't, the philosophy of Karen will come.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, the question isn't whether or not you have faith, but why you have faith in the first place. There's sort of Nietzschean critique of like, oh, you have faith in this, you have faith in that.
Because the capitalist society ingrained in my mind that service is service, and I am attuned to a specific level of service when I go out to eat at a restaurant.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
What I did want to mention, I know that when you had initially said that the two of you were going to meet today,
yes,
you said that you were going to discuss a specific topic. And I didn't.
Yeah.
And I would like you guys to start discussing that topic so that way, I'm not train wrecking your conversation.
No, don't worry, because it does. If whether that conversation happens or not is not a.
I'm a hardcore postmodernist. I don't believe in narratives.
I can close that.
we're good to take it wherever you want, dude. So good. See, God hasn't abandoned you.
Give
you beer.
I had faith.
The beer came.
Would you look at that?
Yeah. I prostrated before the altar and lo.
I praised and the Lord answered.
Yeah. No, I made a joke earlier. So, Mason, you're in front of the sun. I said jokingly I should make a psalm when I go home, like David, except instead of saying God's my shelter, I say Mason's my shelter. From the sun. It's my palm tree that blows above me.
See, everyone
when I
can feel
look at Nineveh.
spiritual experiences, but it doesn't always have to originate from the same, like qualia, like the same concept.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I will say, you texted me after I did the podcast with Dylan here, and you said that what a philosopher would think about value is different than what a Marxist would consider what is value. And I didn't want you to elaborate on what that is. I never asked.
Well, that was just me talking, just saying that it kind of making a joke about how terms are used in philosophy.
Yep.
Because a lot of the times when people talk about values, they're talking about morals or principles or like that. But like to a Marxist, when we're like, if you ever hear us talking about what value is, we're talking about labor.
What can you bring to the table?
Right? Because it's within the analysis of what capital is. Because you're starting with what a commodity is, both the use value and an exchange value, and that's actually a very important thing for the conception is that what makes a commodity is the fact that it is produced for exchange value, not that it's produced for a use value.
Sorry, can you elaborate there, like the use value versus exchange value?
Yeah, so use value is something that is inherent to an object. So, for instance, the glass that is right in front of you, it is
It's got its
used.
inherent value.
Its use value is that you can pour liquid in it and you can drink it. Of course, they have other use values that because use value is something that is determined socially. Like gold, for instance, was something where for a while it was kind of just used for like as a money commodity, but now it's used in a lot of like electronics and things for like wires and because it's a good conductor of electricity. Back to your cup, you could also use the cup if you wanted to smash it on someone's head if you wanted to.
That's what I was it's like, why can't you just smash on someone's head?
If you're feeling threatened or if you're angered or whatever it might be. Of course, we would say right now that's not its quote unquote use value because that's not
right now I'm drinking.
But
if I get really angry,
you would say his use value for that cup.
Yeah, because like
increases to more where you would smash it over someone's head.
The social conditions in which the cup is existing for you right now, it's to drink the beer. If some guy came up and started fucking,
who knows?
Let's say,
hey, this is what. Wait, what's this one called? It's called unchecked aggression.
Okay.
I got it.
That's Greg 2.0.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, it's alcoholics and depressants, so I think it makes me calm instead of aggressive. But we'll see what the case is.
But then the exchange value. This part I'm still, he spends 3 chapters talking about it.
What's like the layman's term definition, would you say?
So like the exchange value is just, the fact that it can be exchanged for something. So there's an equation.
Yeah.
Well, first,
does this assume that you're thinking in like a certain mindset of like a capitalist almost?
It's like, can you sell it? right?
Yeah.
Can you sell
So-
it? Can you trade it?
Well, this
Yeah.
we're kind of starting this, I guess, before selling per
So
se.
I guess, for example, my use value with my Zins is obviously I can put it in my mouth and get
Yeah.
nicotine and addictive, blah, blah, blah. And my exchange value could be, what's the worth of this Zin? And what could I get
Right.
for this Zin?
Right, in a sense, because
Yeah.
with the exchange value,
Okay.
there's different forms, because it, how Marx is proceeding is he's proceeding from like capitalist society as its very infant stages, and then how it then expands out.
Yeah.
So you'd have like the simple form, which would be, 1 can of Zin equals 1 beer.
Yeah.
Or what he uses, the infamous 20 yards of linen equals 1 Coke. And so you have, on the left side of the equation, the relative value.
Yep.
And that is the thing whose value is being expressed. It's playing an active role. And on the other side, you have the equivalent, which is the relative, the commodity whose value is being used to express the relative value's commodity.
Okay.
And within this, what Marx is talking about with like the exchange value is like, okay, you have these two things. And I guess this is kind of going to go back to what we were talking about in our episode, which was that like within the dialectic mode of analysis, one of the things that, qualitative change leads, or quantitative change leads to qualitative change. When he's looking at a commodity, he's looking at, what are the quantitative and qualitative aspects. And the qualitative aspects are the use value, because they're all different qualitatively. Because, if you had a phone and a wallet that were the exact same thing, like there wouldn't be a difference in their use value. Like they're the same exact thing.
So you're saying, like, say I have Apple Pay on my phone, and I don't have my wallet.
Right.
So the use value of my phone right now, when I need to pay my tab,
Right.
is what the wallet would do.
Right.
But then again, it would be different if you had your
So
wallet with
the-
you.
so the-
right? Yeah.
The iPhone, like nowadays, is like a interesting commodity in terms of use value, because
There's so many uses.
because
It's like an infinite.
because you could, because what we would probably say at the end of the day as Marxists is that is just part of its normal use value. Because one of the definitional things, for at least for a Marxist, of what use value is like it's part of the inherent properties of the physical object, like the physical properties. And so that's like a thing that the phone does. And so that's like, it's not necessarily like a new use value in the way like the cup can be when you smash it over, someone's head because they start threatening you. But so when you have two qualitatively different commodities, you can't just give 20 yards of linen and get a coat just out of nowhere, like, because qualitatively they're not the same. So how are you gonna determine, that it's an equal trade that's going on?
It's like my shirt compared to Greg's shirt right now. Technically, this is a designer, more expensive brand, and this would say this is just
I got it for free from work.
like a faded shirt that everyone
Well, it
has.
says Blackwater. Interesting. He's not being the
Clear water.
It's close to Blackwater.
I
I mean, we're owned by BlackRock.
They're lying. They're lying. They're covering for Greg.
That was weird
Yeah,
for you.
yeah.
They've said Blackwater, but they're owned by BlackRock, but it's a clear water. That's so funny.
We're probably owned by BlackRock.
Probably.
I'd say probably at least 50% of the shares. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That's hilarious.
And so you have two qualitatively different things, and so what Marx talks about is like there has to be something equal to them that is not just what they are. And it can't just be like the physical things of like, oh, these two things are made of iron, or the linen is linen and the coat is made of linen.
But I mean, that goes into human psychology, where it depends on basically what a person is willing to give in exchange for something else.
Well,
it all depends on bias,
Right.
So
your relative
Well,
value.
I would say it depends on how you interpret it.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I like.
Yeah.
This whole conversation you guys just had made me think of. It's gonna sound cheesy, but my '93 F-150 square body Ford. I will go on Kelly Blue Book and I will say, damn, this thing ain't even worth $1,000. but to me, that's my first truck. It was my first pickup.
Yes.
It was the first thing that I really learned to drive, and I've been driving that thing for the past 10 years. So obviously, my value is gonna be very different compared to someone else's.
And this might be a good place for me to cut in, because you see, the value here is determined by what it means for you.
Exactly.
And that depends how you interpret it. So, like, in response to Marx's claim that philosophers have hitherto interpreted the world, the point was to change it, I should reply, how you think it should be changed depends on your interpretation of the world, motherfucker. So, in other words...
I mean, he would not disagree with that.
No, absolutely.
He would 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but the point is, though, why should we take Marx's interpretation over others? Right? And this is sort of where the critique of Marx itself comes forward. Leo Strauss was pretty forward on this. He said, basically, Marx is a Machiavellian through and through, and took this assumption metaphysically that human beings are driven by material desires. And it's just in a Keynesian sense, right? Basically, I can get what I want if I manipulate the social structures in a particular way. And this is how Marx interprets the entire history of social interaction, right?
That's crazy, though, because how can he explain something so simple when it became to just, I have fire and I need to feed wife.
This is Leo Strauss's critique of him, because it says, it's Machiavellian through and through. It takes a certain interpretation of what it means to be a human being in order to bring about the history of being, as it were. So it presupposes the hermeneutic circle, where it's like we understand ourselves ontologically as this kind of animal or this being that presupposes that will towards one's desire.
I mean, that's part of the thing with philosophy, is that a lot of people a philosopher will go down one claim, one thesis, and say this is why things came to be, right?
Yeah.
That's busted.
And then you'll be like, that's not the only reason. And of course, that's not the only reason. There's a million different reasons, but that is definitely one of the reasons.
Yes.
Right.
I think the answer, at least Marx would have to Louis Strauss, is that he's somewhat misinterpreting him, because he would say it's not that they're necessarily being I'm going to bend capital, or I'm going to bend feudalism to my interest. It's the fact that because it is in their interest that they do those things, right? Like that it's not that they're doing it and then it conforms to them, rather that the need arises for them to preserve their way of life, and so they will then since they have the power, the money, all of that.
So could you define preserving way of life?
I guess, and for this, it's with them, it'd be preserving the class structure as it is, because if they have, because if we're going from feudalism to capital, at the time, they're pushing back against the merchants. They're starting to kind of shut them down. They're starting to trying to restrict what they're allowed to do. We haven't been in those conditions.
We're good, I think.
I think we're good.
So hang on, I'm a heavy hitter. I'm going to have one more before the road.
One more before
Please.
the road?
Yeah, and then I'll check out. So
This guy.
I can't believe this guy here.
You have to believe me. I mean, I tell people I'm a heavy hitter and they don't believe me. So
he did say alcohol makes me calm. So I was like, that's a sign.
That's a good thing.
Okay, don't believe my word. See the empirical evidence and then make up your own decision. But
as a scientist.
okay, so I took your first recommendation. What's your second recommendation?
Oh, King Billy.
Well, I'll ask you this,
please.
though. What kind of beer do you
Cool.
like?
It's Dylan, right?
That's right. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
Good memory. Thank you so much. And then since we're done ordering, you take that whenever you're ready.
Yep. You want me to bring out your tab with your beer?
That'd be great. Thank you.
You got it.
And then we're in parallel conversations in a Hegelian sense. I was able to actually listen to both of you guys sometimes, and it was really interesting. I remember at the beginning, Mason, you were like, I don't know what the hell we're going to talk about here. But, I'm glad to talk about it, etc. And then you gave some of your own tidbits on that. So, and I'm very self-aware that we're recording right now, so I don't want to give...
we're recording right now. I forgot.
That's right. Yeah, I don't want to give Greg a
For
fucking
6 minutes.
headache because he's going to get home and try to edit this because we had parallel conversations independent of each other.
I'm going to cut out the part where we had a parallel conversation.
Okay, so
Don't worry about that.
Okay, so here's the cut. All right, we're back. We had parallel conversations across the table, and we're here to synthesize them in a Hegelian sense.
We reviewed papers.
We reviewed.
We reviewed
notes.
papers. Yes, right.
Lots of red lines.
Absolutely, and the beer made it easier.
Well, define easy.
So I will say this, in my experience in college, I've gone to classes sober and I've gone to classes high and drunk, or partially both.
all
I
those
haven't
states of
gone to class
consciousness.
drunk,
Yeah.
but I've
My
gone to class
favorite-
high many times.
All the time.
But like,
actually.
as a psychologist, I have to say it just solely depends on what class I'm going to.
Sure.
You know, so it's like for instance, my Soc 414 class was American sports and American society.
Oh God!
So it would relate to two of my favorite topics, but completely different like aspects of the scale: sports and sociology. And it just like came to that. So obviously, I love to go to class high as hell. And you can, you know, Dr. Yoder.
Actually, don't.
Oh my God!
Tell me about Dr. Yoder.
He is one of my favorite human beings ever. He is a graduate from the University of Idaho. He is a part of the Sigma Nu fraternity. So he was just like an absolute Chad. But he was also at the same time a sociologist, a scientist, an academic, professor.
Best of
at a
both
school.
worlds.
Yeah,
Man of
exactly.
the intellect and the world.
it was someone that I felt that I could really connect with. And so it's like when I went to the class, I would just go fucking stoned. But if it's a class I didn't like, I would just... I'm not saying I did this a lot, maybe more when I was a freshman, which doesn't even equivalent to my quality of classes I was taking. But
thank you
I would
so
go with a few
Thank
beverages
you.
in my
Thank
system.
you so much for coming in, guys.
No, thank you.
Thank
See
you.
again.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, it's like I could attribute that to me being a freshman in a fraternity pledge. And then my decisions as I was maturing and making different decisions, it's like it all just really depends on the scenario, the environment, what's going on, what's stimulating you at that time. And that's kind of like been my mindset with everything is it's like what you put in front of you is what you're going to get out. And it's like...
Yeah, and what you put
Yeah.
what you put your own thoughts into.
Yeah,
Because I mean,
exactly.
even if you're at a lecture, that doesn't mean that you're going to take in any of the information that they're saying, right? Because a lot of times when I'm, say, listening to an audiobook, I can't take in any of the information because I have my own thoughts that are going on at the same time, parallel to that audiobook that I'm listening to. But when I'm reading something, that's different because my thoughts are occupied by only what I'm reading. Unless I go on some kind of weird tangent where I start thinking and reading at the same time, and then you get like 2 pages in and you're like, wait a minute. I was
didn't
thinking
remember
that whole
a thing.
time.
I
Yeah.
don't remember
Right.
a thing.
How does that work? I'm like how can you read
For
something
me,
and
it's
think
always,
at the same time?
I look at one thing,
Yeah.
and then it starts making me think about the thing that I
Yeah.
just read, but then I start thinking about it more, and then I'm reading more, and I'm like, my eyes are just moving while I'm just thinking.
Right.
I'm not,
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's actually how I study Nietzsche. So I look up
Yeah.
audiobooks of the gay science, for instance.
Yep.
I'd sit there with my headphones, I'd just listen to it, and then I'd pause it and I'd write down a paragraph or something in response. And this is how I also responded to lots of lectures. And I'm really scared because if I kick the bucket early, had a heart attack or something, people go through my lecture notes and go, what the hell is this professor talking about? because I would literally have like the actual notes, but then I'd do like paren, or I forget to put parentheses, around a paragraph of my own thoughts in response to it, right? Just as a dialectical move.
Yeah, and do you write your notes as aphorisms?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I have like notebooks, like number 300. I'll write something. I just like.
I mean, I
number
obviously
it.
number them. I don't
then-
number them all. I just have like a fuck ton of like Google Docs.
Greg, you're just autistic.
Hey,
Well,
I
hey,
agree.
Wittgenstein was probably autistic and created one of the most wonderful books
Oh,
of
no, for
philosophical
sure,
literature.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's not
Well,
to
he's
put
not saying
down
anything
on
against
autism at all.
autism.
No. I just am acknowledging that Greg is a little autistic sometimes.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, but that's to say, but like as a psychologist, I understand everything falls on a scale and everything is relative and everything is.
Whoa there, Derrida.
Now, see,
Don't start with Rita, all right?
I
Or
went
Derrida.
to
I don't know how do you pronounce it.
Derrida. Yeah.
I went to class stoned for 2 reasons. One, because political science, sometimes you need it to just bear through what the people are saying,
Yeah.
No, for real.
because
That was me and
sometimes they're
Nick
just
Dunn's class.
stupid. They're like, man, why won't North Korea give up their nuclear weapons? And it's like, I don't know.
You're retarded.
Look at Libya. Start
Because
there.
they're afraid that they're going to get nuked, maybe? I don't know.
Or Iraq. And it's so funny because you can find, and I wrote these on my paper, you can find from state media from North Korea them being like, yeah, because of Iraq and Libya, this is why we're keeping our nuclear weapons. It's like, it's not a fucking mystery, guys.
Right.
It's not because fucking Kim Jong-un is like,
Do a little research.
like super crazy and is like, I'm just going to launch these. It's like,
Right.
no. it's because
It's the same reason why we have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, right.
It's just a big flex.
Right.
Pretty much.
Well,
And then-
yeah, go ahead.
Or philosophy to get me more chatty. Like, I can't lie. I mean, maybe during his office hours, but like in class, I can't lie. I don't know if I talk to Hubs sober a lot. But it's not like it's, inhibiting my ability to participate. Because if anything, and I think Dylan could attest to this, I'm one of the only people who would read before class.
No,
and
100%.
would,
That's why-
understand
that's why I
what's
love you
going
so
on
much,
in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the things I try to facilitate in the philosophy club, which Trey attended, was
I think I need to get going.
you gotta get going, Mason.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so I say look at your phone. I hope
Sounds good, Bob. Yeah, no, I'm tired. Fucking, I got work at like 6. So.
He's a blue
damn.
collar man. Finish your beer, young man. What are you doing?
All right. Damn, I was about to grab it.
Dude, I was telling Greg, we would be the perfect quad for the podcast.
Yeah.
Like we're recording now, we just need to get all in on a Zoom or something.
Yeah, sure.
Get, like some type of like itinerary to talk about.
Yeah, we will.
Well, I'd love to talk about Marxist value theory in respect to my own paper. That'd be great.
Well,
Yeah.
you see, you got to come to Boise for Wheezy. You got to come to Boise for work.
I gotta come to
You just got to go. So,
Yeah.
bada bing, bada boom, in my living room.
We'll plan it.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Hot box the fucking.
All right.
All right.
Hey, it was great meeting you.
See you,
Take
Mason.
care.
Man.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where was I?
Talking about the philosophy club.
Oh, yes. So one of the things I tried to preach in Philosophy Club implicitly was an anti-bigotry policy. So basically, you're allowed to any opinion you want as long as you back it up with arguments. And the way I define bigotry is sort of prejudice, but when the facts and the evidence is allowed to present itself for why you disagree with something, you ignore it. So for instance, let's say I'm against communism, let's say. And suddenly someone presents themselves and say, hey, like Google, like you can look me up anytime, understand what communism is, but I refuse to on principle. Okay, that's bigotry, And so the one of the things I was trying to preach in the club was like, you're allowed to argue against other people's positions, but you have to argue. You're not allowed to hold a fucking position just on principle.
Yep.
And that's a lot. That's actually really hard for a lot of people to accept because we don't know what those unchallenged principles are until it's too late. We come to the table with those ideas, and then we don't know what to say.
There was one person, although she was never there that often, where to me it felt like her interpretation of philosophy was more of just like if someone says something, challenge every bit of their claim. Like in the Jordan Peterson of like,
Right.
what is I? What do we mean?
Well,
by
challenge the semantics of it. Yeah.
And
You said that like Jordan Peterson too.
yeah,
That's right.
I can't help it. Him and Zizek, whenever I'm talking about Zizek, it come out, all of that. But
Yeah.
but philosophy club like Ed, God, I love Ed. Ed and Anthony.
And Anthony
Damn,
were
I wish I
amazing.
joined the philosophy club.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was a thing.
No, it's amazing. No, I was president. I had the privilege to be the president of the philosophy club, and my job was to facilitate dialogue. I wasn't there to press any opinions, although I had private opinions, obviously, which I've expressed on podcasts and so on. I'm just there to facilitate thinking, and which is why I have a strict anti-bigotry policy. And I never said that, but it was very implicit. It's like you need to think about what you're saying and present arguments. And the woman that Trey was mentioning, she came to the philosophy club often, and would challenge every bit of information, but she was sort of there to keep me sharp. As Paul would say, iron sharpens iron, and that's one true statement from the New Testament I will subscribe to. And so like she would come in and you would say some sort of predicate, but she would take advantage of her ambiguity in it. Like, how do you interpret this? And then I was forced to explain it to her. And I absolutely adored that. I love that sort of antagonism within the club. Some people didn't like it as much because it sort of inhibited dialogue. But it was great because at the end of the day, it allows us to understand clearly what we're talking about. If I had to create rules for dialectic or for debate in general, it'd be to define your terms. But the way I would express it is, you have to understand what people are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be a philosophy club, not just people coming in and talking about their
opinions
or whatever.
Yeah, like,
right?
hey, this is what I believe, and they just walk out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So like basically, the first thing you want to do is to understand each other, right?
Yep.
And a lot of disagreements begin from a misunderstanding. And so, like, I can't tell how many times someone, like, I will make a claim, for instance.
Yep.
And in everyday setting, might interpret it the way I think of it. But then maybe someone says, oh, well I disagree with that. And they give some sort of, diatribe. At the end of it, before responding to it, I just say, well, what do you think I mean by this? And they explain it and go, oh, my God, that's not what I meant at all. And then, try to explain my terms correctly. And they go, oh, I don't disagree with that. It's like, well, there's nothing more to be said. But if there is a disagreement, that's when a genuine disagreement presents itself. And then that's when real discussion can begin.
I saw something interesting like this because, as I mentioned to you, the MAGA communist people, which that's a whole mess. Those people...
Wait, say that again?
So they're fascists, but they
Wait,
rate
that's
themselves...
quite
MAGA
a claim.
communists? Wait, what?
Well, I mean, you read Echo, so
they... So basically, it's because they're basically doing the same tactics of the Nazi Party, where you're taking up the Workers' Party, Communist Party. Now it's the American Communist Party, but their whole idea is that because they're not necessarily wrong when they say within the MAGA base is a lot of the working class. That claim is true, but then they proceed from there by going. So therefore, we have to appeal to them by engaging in reactionary ideology, rejecting trans rights, talking about how, America, because when you get to a Marxist look at what America is, you start at the ideas of settler colonialism. They, on the other hand, are because it happened so long ago, it's this own independent nation. You don't need to worry about all of these. And because of this, they're essentially, they take the MAGA, Make America Great Again, and they give it a communist
that's
flair.
almost anti-Marxist because they're rejecting history.
Exactly.
Jeez.
And the thing is
but
there's a lot of Dugan influence in there. That's where,
okay.
Dugan, there's a lot of the ideas of what Dugan's talking about of, co-opting the authority of fascism with some of the social aspects of things like that mishmash.
Yep.
And so one of their main guys who believes the U.S. is socialist because we abolished the gold standard, which would make Nixon Lenin, which, hey, I guess, Comrade Nixon.
Who knew it was a paranoid Quaker? Was a Leninist. That's funny.
But he was on Tim Pool's podcast, and the reason why I was listening to
Tim
this...
Pool.
Yeah. Because the reason why, I was listening to this is, even though I don't while I reject, a lot of what the MAGA communists are doing, at times... their main dude while I think he hasn't necessarily read things correctly, he has at least read a little bit.
Sure.
And so it's interesting to see him debate, because he was talking to a libertarian.
Right.
And he was debating a libertarian on, Marxism and libertarianism. All this is to set up. Tim Pool, at one point, was talking about the definition of the bourgeoisie.
Right.
And he pulls up an academic thing, and he says that, and says, to a Marxist, the bourgeoisie is X, Y, and Z. And he gives a, pretty good answer, because it's, it's an easy answer to give.
Yeah.
And then Tim proceeds to get mad at him and be like, oh, this is what the left does. They change what racism means or what bourgeoisie means. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, Tim, no, for once, no, you were getting how we are using the terms, to facilitate that conversation, because the whole thing was talking about, how does a Marxist, they villainize the bourgeoisie, how do they feel about them? Well, to understand that, you have to understand the what a Marxist means by bourgeoisie. And but what was interesting is Haz was like, well, it doesn't necessarily mean the mom and pop shops, but it does. It's just they're in the subclass of being, the petty bourgeoisie. Because a lot
sorry, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
What does a Marxist think about the bourgeoisie? What is the bourgeoisie?
Well, there's I guess there's two realms.
Yep.
Because there's no Marxist analysis that will give you a moral answer of how they feel about the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Because a materialist analysis doesn't really allow you to be because of this, I think they're horrible people and they're bad.
Well, it's Izod distinction.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's the Izod distinction. for what they are.
Yeah.
They are just the people who own the means of production. They get to determine what is produced, how it's produced, how much of it is produced, where it's going to be sold, who it's going to be sold to, how much it's going to be sold for, asterisks on how much it's going to be sold for. But that's like the material view. Then you can come in, I guess, kind of with an immaterial view of whatever your morals might be of, because they engage in exploitation. Of course, earlier in Marx's career, when he was using it, he was kind of using it as kind of to get more of a reaction out of something, like a moral reaction in the in his younger days.
Yep.
But when like in Capital and I guess anytime a Marxist now is using the word exploitation, they're meaning it more in the sense of just, I guess it's just the term that we use for the extraction of surplus value.
Yeah.
And so you can then go from there and be like, I think exploitation is amoral. You might have whatever reasons for it, but you can't necnecessarily make.
You're saying
Marxism
amoral, not immoral.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's one of those things where you will never get to a moral analysis of a thing from a Marxist perspective, because it's talking about how things are, what it is. And I've seen books. I know the philosophy library at U of I has some book that's like Marxism and ethics, and so there have been people who have maybe have tried to take that mode of analysis and apply it to ethics and morality.
Yeah, to like put a moral value
right
on Marxism.
Right, or at least get a moral framework from a Marxist perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that from a material, because the thing about Marxism, the base thing that everyone is operating from is the method, the dialectical materialist method. And I don't really think that you can get a moral framework from that system. I'm also one of those people where I think that it's not something that can necessarily be applied to natural science, because it's something that was developed for social science and explaining society, not explaining how the stars operate.
Sure.
Maybe you can apply it to the stars, but that's not its primary purpose.
Yeah, and I was thinking Marxism is it's more of like a, not socialist, but it's like social psychology more so than it is
it could be a Marxist without being communist, for instance. So you can read Das Kapital and agree with the critiques of capitalism without necessarily subscribing to the solution that Marx presents. Absolutely. Right. Which is something that people here in North Idaho don't understand. You can say, I love Marx, and say, oh, you're a commie. It's like, nah.
Because what Marx really did in the Communist Manifesto is present a critique on capitalism. At least, from my standpoint, it didn't seem like he really presented any solutions. I mean, sure, he might have, but that was kind of more like a sub. That was more like a sub part of the whole essay.
It's also part of the materialist framework in that we have not existed in the conditions of what a communist society is, so it's impossible to sit there and be like, this is how this thing will be and this is how this thing will be. The only things that they are taking from here that they can apply to there really
is what they see, right?
Is what they see, and from the Engels essay, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, where the first thing that they're seeing, is one thing we'll do is we're going to be changing the relations of production to be socialized like how the productive forces are already.
Have you read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, either of you? You have?
We talked about this, remember?
We did?
Yeah, we did on the pod. It was it was the last thing that we talked about.
Yeah. So with that, it's so in Capitalist Realism, just for Dylan, just so you're aware, he basically argues that there's this thing in capitalism where people will say, well, if you think about anything outside of capitalism, you're not being realistic. So capitalist realism is the perspective that capitalism is the only realistic perspective on economics.
The kazoo's over there. That's great.
I love that. I mean, I wish I had a kazoo.
It's okay. Childhood spontaneity is the salt of the earth. We can't shake up our interpretations of the world if we don't have them.
That's right. The childlike wonder.
That's right.
Sorry, as you're saying.
I mean, that's basically it. I was just.
Well, you were saying.
Hey, do you mind if I take a drag of your
Absolutely.
vape?
Yeah. So,
Is that because, like, I guess, because I wouldn't say that necessarily you'd be like a Marxist without being a communist, because I would think that in order to be a Marxist, you would have to be. Well, I guess for me, if you want to be a consistent, because if you're taking the dialectical materialist method as it is, I think that you really can't come to any other conclusion than what Marx did. But I think you are right to say that someone can open Capital and read it and come out not being a communist, but critical of Capital, because the whole point of Capital is just to not only critique but also to describe what capitalism is from its start to where I guess for him where it is now.
right.
And so you can come out not being a communist but being critical of Capital.
Right. Dialectical materialism is implicit within Capital, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But say I'm a layman, I just open up Capital,
Yeah.
I see various claims that Marx has made about capitalism that say, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, you don't necessarily need to agree with the method by which he came to his claims,
Yeah.
but you can agree with those propositions.
Right.
And that allows you to somewhat be a Marxist without having to accept the
Because,
background.
I mean,
assumptions.
maybe there'll be Marxists who disagree with me, but I feel
But that
like
doesn't make you a Marxist.
Yeah.
Because, I did this podcast with this guy named Rule Manette, and he wrote this essay about Buddhism and how having the ism at the end of Buddhism actually contradicts the whole idea of Buddhism.
That's right, yeah.
Because Buddhism, it's anti-dogma.
Right.
It's basically
You see the
a
Buddhist
method.
kill him.
It's basically a method by which you can escape dogma and escape following a belief structure, right? So with isms, it's like you can say, okay, I mean, I'm a Marxist, but you don't actually believe all the things that Marx said, right?
Right,
so
yeah.
how can you say that you're a Marxist? Really, you subscribe to some of the ideas of Marx, but you're not a Marxist.
Right. It's one of those things where it's like the language is just a succinct way to express it. But
Yes.
because like there are things that I mean, there's debate on if he really did, when he died, believe that revolution was first going to happen in Europe or Russia, because there was kind of him moving towards being like, oh, it might happen in Russia, which it did. But for a while, he was firm in his belief that Europe would be the first place to experience a revolution. That's not true. And not like I wouldn't hold that as true
Or
for
refutation
Marx.
or something. Yeah.
Right, and it's not something so essential where, well, some people might argue it is, but because of the fact that conditions determine whatever it might be, because one of the things that newer Marxists might say is Marx couldn't account for how capital would develop to subdue the worker war as it has, where now they are in favor of I mean, that's kind of it, because then you get into the weeds where it's like he kind of talks about this and believes this when he's talking about false consciousness and ideology, but at the same time, it'd be absurd to be like he would know exactly. Yes,
Well,
Yeah,
do
we're
great.
doing
Thanks
great.
for checking
Thank
on us. Thank you. Yeah.
but it's it's not like he will. But it's not like he could have seen that most people are going to be living in air-conditioned housing, and that conditions for the working person will get better, but that it's not because capitalism didn't go in the way that Marx was thinking, but rather that it's a way to save its own ass.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I mean, he didn't account for how society would change and how we'd adapt, so we have this environment. The environment is capitalism, right? That's our socioeconomic environment. And he didn't account for how we would, as humans and as a society, adapt to capitalism, how we'd adapt to the new technologies that come into play. Not just normal technology, but also social technologies, like different kind of government implementations that we put forth, like voting rights and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, he's obviously not, when he's writing, not thinking like this, it will never proceed past here, because that would be absurd from everything else that he has said about how society evolves. But Marx, I don't think Marx could have ever predicted that, by 2024 in America because of things like computers and automation and I guess, capital in itself because of cheaper labor, that it's going to be mostly service and not manufacturing.
Sure.
You guys are still okay and all closed out. So
We're all closed out.
Check.
Well,
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
we're just
We're good.
chatting
Thank
up.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I also wanted to mention that. I lost my train of thought. I was going to say that that he didn't account for that we'd be making all these changes, and that perhaps maybe even capitalism was a route towards a communist society.
Well, no, he definitely believes that is the case with historical materialism because he does kind of take the Hegelian notion.
That's right, yeah.
This is the one thing where Marx this is always the one area where he weirdly just kind of abandons the materialist idea. Maybe when he's older he doesn't necessarily think that it's going to march to a communist society, but for most of his writing, that's what they are saying is, this is going to happen. This is inevitable. And, if
AI, universal basic income, etc., etc.
Right.
And, it's one of those things where I would think if capitalism were to continue how it's going and based upon what has happened historically, it would be inevitable. But the thing that, and who knows, maybe if he had gotten to live longer, he would have written more about the ecological effects. Because what's funny enough is in Capital, in the first few chapters, he kind of talks about this, but he really couldn't have accounted for, because how could he? The fact that it might be an inevitable, but also and that's the one thing that I struggle with is is it inevitable, or is that just kind of something that's metaphysical?
I don't think it's inevitable.
Yeah. Well, that's why I cut in a little bit, because my sort of suspicion against capitalism is that it's sort of Christianity for atheists. Is that they have this idea of a paradisal freedom, right, that communism offers, where everyone loves each other to some extent, which is not necessarily determined materially, because you could take an opposite dialectical view of history as human beings as being selfish bastards, to the point where a utopia where people are considerate of each other on a material basis is impossible, right? And so you can think of it as sort of a Heraclean dumpster fire, where there's this constant process of becoming, and the idea of a sustained utopia where materials are distributed equally among every human being is almost impossible. And it's not saying that's not communism is impossible. Far from it. I think it's possible. It's just that it's very unlikely given the conditions of humanity up hitherto.
Well, and also just on a natural basis, if let's say we're not humans and we're just animals,
Sure.
Resources aren't distributed equally. They just aren't. Sometimes because we're subject to the laws of nature itself. For instance, there may be some kind of a drought and the deer don't get as much grass or whatever to eat that year or whatever. And the wolves start taking them down, and then eventually there's a giant wolf population, a low deer population, and what do you know? Now the wolves have less food to eat, and their population starts to dwindle, and the grass starts to go up again, and the deers roam throughout the earth.
So, the thing about, there's two things that I guess Marx would say about that. One, he'd be smug and he'd be like, well, we're not animals, we're humans, so because if you read him, he's an ass.
Right. Well, sorry, not to interrupt, but I was just saying, it kind of proves my point that Heidegger is a precondition for Marx, because Heidegger would say we are the beings that interpret. So that's what creates use and exchange value.
Right.
Especially the use value is a ready-to-hand interpretation of what is unconcealed in our being. So I can't understand what money is unless I had some sort of pre-contextual history that offered me the opportunity to say, hey, I have some cotton in my pocket with faces on it. I'm going to give it to you so I can pay my loan at the library or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
The second thing he would say is he would be like, what do you mean by equality? Because in terms of, because for equality, he kind of hates the word, and he thinks it's a bourgeois invention, quote unquote. And his reasoning for this is within the critique of the Gotha program, because the Goethe program was a program by the Socialist Democratic Party, SDP. And Marx was like, you guys are fucking everything up. And so like there's a big critique. It's like one of the must reads of like Marxism. Like when people give you the list, it's always on that list. But what he says, you know, and into at least towards equality is like if you were to give things like exactly equal, you know, each of us get 5 pounds of meat.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I guess to simplify it, you know, I get 5 pounds, you get 5 pounds. And, you know, you have a girlfriend, and let's say, you know, you guys had a kid. And I live alone by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's say, you know, you consume, you know, 2 pounds of meat. Girlfriend consumes 2 pounds of meat. Baby, or you consume, you know, 3.
Yeah.
And, you know, girlfriend, baby consume 1 each. Something like that. For me, right, I only need, you know, 2 pounds of meat, 3 pounds of meat, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so I will have some left over. And so for him, one of the things that he talks about is like if you want true equality, it has to be unequal. And that's why you know the thing that's going to be inscribed on banners is from each according to his ability. You know, what can you give to each according to his needs? You know, being what do you need, you know, for your condition. So, you know, what you need with having a family and what I need as a single man living on my own are completely different.
Yeah, or even if your metabolism is bigger, right? You require more food to survive.
Right. And so it's one of those things where they take that with, you know, because with Marx and Engels, how they, you know, they're viewing capital is, you know, it's a progression in terms of the productive forces. Things are more efficient and things are better. You know, you can produce things a lot better, higher quality, all of that. And they want to keep that because that's one of the things why, at least for communists, when people talk about someone like Pol Pot, we laugh and we're like, you know, if you were to actually understand, you know, what Marxism and communism is, you would laugh at Pol Pot's interpretation and implementation. Because like one of the big things he does is he goes back to the countryside rather than the cities, which is a reduction in the productive forces, which is the complete opposite of, you know, what Marxists want. They want to increase the productive forces to the point where production is as efficient as possible, so you're able to produce what you need in the least amount of time as possible, so you can do other things. You know, he has a quote, I think it's in Capital, I don't know, it's in some of his writing where he's like, you know, in the morning I fish, and in the evening I debate, and you know, at night I critique.
That's right.
You know, I can do all of these things rather than just being a carpenter or just being a tailor. Or,
just being one thing.
Right.
Sure. Work-life balance.
Yeah. Work-life balance, except because like his thing is, you know, the goal is to make labor life's primary want. And at first, a lot of people, when they hear that, they are like they
wait,
have a
are you
rejection.
a capitalist?
Well, they have a rejection, or like they have like a negative reaction to it because they think of labor as like their job, and like what they do at work, and they're like, I fucking hate that. Why would I want that to be my prime life want? But like, you know, my dream in my head of like what I would love to do in my life, right, is make movies. To make a movie, that requires labor. But like my life's primary want, like the thing that I want to do with my time and all of that is to like make, you know, write, direct, shoot movies, things like that. But that's still labor. And so, you know, it's labor in that sense.
Make that your primary desire is that labor. The labor that you dream to do.
Right, that you want to do, you know, the things that you want to do. Because that's one of the things about capital is the alienation of you and your labor, because it's, you know, you don't own your labor because you sell it to
nor do you care about it.
Exactly, because you don't own the thing that you're producing. You know, like when I'm at Office Max, or when I was, I guess, because I don't work there anymore, and I'm, you know, making prints
Marx
for
is
someone.
Office Max, Jesus Christ. It's like the opening to Fight Club. That's so interesting. That's awesome.
And, you know, I'm working there and I'm making people, you know, their prints and whatever.
And the copier and the light just crossing your face. That's great.
Like, this fucking sucks. I
Yeah.
gotta read some fucking Marx.
Yeah, pull a red book
hobby.
and then just like read it. Yeah.
I mean, listen, I'd be reading Lenin, Marx, like, because, you know, you have a computer there, and when it's slow, you know, I can just stand
of
there and
course.
read.
No, I mean, I worked at it was Tri-State. Tri-State Outfitters in Moscow.
Yeah.
And we had a computer, so when it was slow, I would just be writing.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, and, you know, and it's, you know, you're kind of like, haha, I'm getting paid to do you know, something that I enjoy. But, you know, like, when I'm working there and, you know, someone prints 10 black and white pages, and, you know, normally I'm supposed to charge them, but I'm like, I don't care enough about this company. It's costs, you know, it costs them, you know, $1.50 to do it, $4 for the customer or whatever. You know, it probably costs the company more money to process the transaction and all of that. I mean, probably not, because obviously they wouldn't.
But
the
if we go to a Kantian perspective, we're like, well, what if everyone did that?
No,
what if
that's
everyone did that?
Yeah, no, that's actually.
the kid's fucking.
Yeah.
Do only things that are universal. Fuck
Well,
you, Todd.
let me interject here real quick because I had a couple thoughts. It's really interesting. One of the, I think, appeals of the Marxist perspective is that it gives an account of hierarchy as holistic rather than dominator perspective, right? So the dominator perspective, and this is interesting because I think a lot of people think of hierarchies as dominator hierarchies, right? So in other words, it doesn't matter how you got up there. You're just up there telling everyone what to do, and you're reaping the benefits, right?
Yeah.
I think of this as sort of the bourgeois conception of hierarchy, right? I can't tell you how many times I heard some white Republican ass tell me, oh, they got to that position because they worked hard. And I look at their background, their family, their money, and I say, no, they didn't. It's not a meritocracy.
Well, it's not to say that some people did work hard.
That's right. No. So I'm not making an absolutistic claim.
And there are, because like there's very few professions that are strictly meritocratic. Like one is sports. Sports is one of those things where meritocracy is, for the most part, true.
Sure.
You know, you have some people, like for instance, like I'm a 49ers fan, and the head coach of that team, Kyle Shanahan, his dad, Mike Shanahan, is a legendary head coach. You know, won Super Bowls. Like, you know, I think he's in the Hall of Fame. And it is one of those things where, like, there may have been, you know, oh, you know, he's Shanahan's son, you know, we should hire him. But he is also a really fucking good head coach. Now, there is the obvious, well, you know, since he was around his dad and he had those opportunities, you know, that's a different conversation, you know, in terms of like how he got the merit.
But he was able to prove it in the end.
Right.
Have you ever been whitewater rafting, either of you?
No, but I wanna.
Actually, you know, how about this? We do another podcast.
Whitewater rafting.
We're rafting with you. And now Nietzsche said you can't. Any thought you can't keep while hiking's a bad thought. So let's keep that conversation going while we're doing whitewater rafting and see what sticks.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that when you're whitewater rafting, so you're doing it with a guide, right? Because this is your first time whitewater rafting. You need a guide to do it, otherwise you're going to die.
Right.
Yes.
So when you're whitewater rafting, you have to do exactly what the guide says, or you're fucked. All right? You got to do exactly what the guide says, because the guide knows how the river works. They've floated it a million
Well, if I can
times.
tell you turn left, you're going to like capsize and drown.
Yeah. You got to, when they tell you to row, you row. When they tell you not row, you don't row. Because if you don't follow that, it's not going to go well on the whitewater rafting.
You got to follow
trip.
the logos of the universe that presents itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in that situation, there is a hierarchy, there's a meritocracy, because they went to that position because they're a good whitewater rafter, right? There are certain situations where you need that kind of situation because people rise to the top because they are good. And not just that, but you need that hierarchy because without it, you'd be lost or you'd die. Right? That's the hierarchy that Marx is talking about.
Yeah, like like he wants, because that's the thing is like, you know, we want where, you know, the workers are deciding, for instance, who their managers are. Like, all because, you know, you're like in a socialist mode of production doesn't necessarily mean that there's no managers. Right. Or anything like that, but that like the managers are chosen by the people who work there and can be, you know, revoked from their position if, you know, the workers feel like, you know, they're poor at their job or whatever it might be, because they would want it to be more meritocratic, where because the idea is you want production to be more to be more efficient. Now, of course, there's one thing that underlies all of this, and that is it's a long fucking process. Like, one of the things that Marxists now have to understand, and some newer Marxists don't, is that like, even if like tomorrow, for some reason, there was some secret organizing going underground, and then a big general strike and revolution happens, and there's some establishment of a state, you're not going to hit a developed socialist society, and then, or even getting to developing towards a communist society until, well after we're dead. Like, it's a long process. Like, capital didn't become what it is by the 1800s, in a century, or, in a weekend. It starts in 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, failed attempts, building, and then...
Yeah, I mean, there's reform that takes place.
And then there's the cultural development, and that's something that, it's like the thing for, like, Mao, the Cultural Revolution that he did, kind of bad. Like, it's... Like, there's
that's kind of understatement.
Like, there's
it's kind of shit show.
There's a lot of Marxists who think like the Cultural Revolution was like amazing. I'm more of like, listen, I think Mao did some good things, but also this fucking guy, like the Cultural Revolution, like, it's like Mao kind of post 1950s, like after the Sino-Soviet split, goes off the rails. Like, he gets mad about the peaceful coexistence with the West, but then he's like, Richard Nixon, my best friend, how we doing? In the Cultural Revolution,
he's putting people
saying
in fucking like re-education camps and everything.
Because the Cultural Revolution, the way how they went about it, because basically Mao was just like, we're gonna force them to now do this, but the idea of like there needing to be like a cultural revolution is something that I'm like, that is something that needs to take place. But what that is, that's not it, Chief. Because you're not going to walk around with red guards being like, you need to read the book. Like, it's something that has to happen with, as the mode of production establishes itself.
I imagine Hobbes' Leviathan where I open my backpack because I have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I am welcome to you because I'm obeying the structure.
Yeah, like...
Well, people need to want to do something, right? Well, I mean, when you've read 1984, both of you?
Of course, yeah.
So there's a very important scene in that book where he's talking about like the old dictatorships or whatever. They said thou shall not. Then they said thou shall, right? They told you what not to do, and then they told you what to do. But we tell you, we big brother, we tell you thou art. We tell you what you are, right? And if you want people to be compliant with something, they need to become something. They need to become what it is, not just follow something because there's fear involved, but they need to truly believe in it.
Right.
And you can't truly believe in something unless you come to it of your own free will.
Of course.
And that's outside of the free will argument.
Sure. Well, so I got to use this really quick, but before I go, I want to tell you guys. So that's really interesting. I'd love to continue the conversation on this because Heidegger sort of comes in and says, well, we can't know how to change the world instead of interpretation. But his qualification is that's not interpretation of phenomena necessarily, but interpretation of ourselves as human beings and what life means. So like the possibilities of rock climbing, for instance, right? So usually when you rock climb, you have a belayer so that when you slip, you don't fucking fall 100 feet to the ground and kill yourself. But there's people that do that. Now, that possibility of living that life where you risk everything on the climb might seem insane, right? But to accept the possibility that you could go without a belayer gives you a sort of dignity or interpretation of yourself that's not privy to everyone else, right? And so there's sort of
like, I don't need the safety net.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a sort of despotism of the herd, or the Das Mann, or the they, as I would say, where you have this common interpretation of what one does in life, right? That prohibits one from taking up possibilities available in the world to do things, to dare things, I would say, that are not accepted. Now, of course, this is free of moral evaluation, so obviously we could critique Heidegger on this ground. I guess Heidegger was a fucking Nazi. But let's get that out there. But on the other hand, though, like let's say there is a possibility in my world to take up something that people wouldn't agree with. Well, that limits the possibility of human potential and possibility for interpreting life itself differently. So the history of life, Marx himself is a good example, right? Because Marx was pushing against the grain of what they say. So industrial London says it's okay to let 5-year-olds fall into the furnace and burn as they're shoveling coal, right, for like a penny an hour. It's like, no way. Like, no, this is not okay.
Yeah.
But they had to have someone who challenged the world that they're in
exactly.
and interpret world differently.
Yep.
And so Heidegger would present sort of a history of being where man reinterprets themselves and their life in relationship to the world continually, right? And so I'd love to come back to this conversation sort of to mind to like what my concern is with sort of the preconditions that allow the Marxist interpretation of the world and the change that it presents to be possible. And without sort of a sort of Heideggerian lens or an interpretation of value with respect to the goals of how we interpret our lives, such a revolution such as the one that Marx presents is impossible. So with that, I shall take a break. I'll be right.
All right.
By the way, capitalist realism is like 89 pages, so I know on like one night you will just eat.
I'll eat that down. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, I guess that'll conclude our Into the Absurd episode with Trenton, Dylan, and Mason.
Very good.
Peace out.